Hi, it's Floss from Floss Workshop Art here with you today. I'm a little bit camera shy, so I'll be happier when the camera turns around the other way. So what we've got going on today is collagraphs. A couple of prints that I've done on the gel plate using printed collages, and basically it's the textures of the collage that puts the outline print onto the gel plate, and from there you can add colour. Let's get started. So these were a couple that I've already done previously, and some were a lot stronger than others, some had more detail than others. This one was a bit of a fluke actually, because I didn't think I was ready to pull a print, and so wanted to start again. So I pulled a roll-off sheet that just had a bit of black in the background, and then used a thin layer of white to pull it to give me a clear plate. And I actually love the way that it's just revealed a lot of the monotones. You can see I've added a little bit of free motion embroidery onto this one for the steps and for the fencing around the top of the lighthouse. So this is the actual cardboard collage that I used to put the basic print sheet onto the gel plate with. So I did a simple drawing of Beachy Head Lighthouse from East Sussex in England, and I transferred that onto an old cereal box using carbon paper. So literally putting the carbon paper down and tracing through the lines again, and then cutting out the shapes and sticking those onto a thin piece of cardboard. So I particularly like the rays, but I wanted to add some extra definition, so I'm going to use Seth Apter's rubber stamp from PaperArtsy in order to do that. So as you can see from the edges here, I really like the ripped edges of the masking tape, but I just wanted to give it extra detail and definition using the embossing. I'm just going to press a little bit of embossing ink onto the rubber stamp, and then I'm going to press that onto where the lighthouse ray is going to be, just to give that extra definition. Then sprinkle where you have put the embossing ink with your embossing powder. I'm just using a vanilla here. It doesn't really matter what colour you're going to be using, because ultimately you're just using it for the texture to be printed onto the gel plate. So I'm just going to heat set the embossing ink, and then I'm going to add a little bit more detail into where that light definition is. So again, I'm just going to sprinkle that with the embossing powder and then heat set that before I then embark onto the next bit. So foolishly, I cover that over with the stamps that I'm actually using, so you can't actually see that, but you'll see that shortly. So here I'm using another PaperArtsy stamp by Seth Apter, and I'm going to add that into the base where the sea is to give me texture for the water. Now why I'm covering over the lighthouse there is because I don't want that to go over the base of the lighthouse. Now I'm going to switch stamps to another one, also by Seth Apter, by PaperArtsy, and I'm going to add that over the top of the ones that I've already embossed before I actually heat set that with powder. And that's so that I get a real mix of the two stamps to give me more definition and texture into the sea area. So yeah, there you go. There's the detail that I added for the full light rays. What I'm now going to do is I'm just going to sprinkle the sea area with this same embossing powder, just to give you the definition of the texture in the sea. Again, I'm just going to tap off the excess. And I actually really like the way you've got the texture coming into the sea on that. I think it's actually a really nice piece as it is before I do anything else to it. But what I now want to do is just add some block to the bottom around the base of the lighthouse. And as you can see, I'm masking tape the area off so that again that the embossing powder didn't go over the definition of the lighthouse. And then what I'm going to do is I'm just going to heat set that in the same way as I did with all the other pieces of embossing. Now, as you can see, I'm cutting away the sky area, and my thoughts behind that was that if I cut away that area where I ink onto the, or paint onto the gel plate, it will leave the darker sky area from where the paint gets rolled and the collage or the Collagraph doesn't take the ink or the paint off of the gel plate. I actually really like the way that that looks right now, and I think that could be a piece of art in itself. But here goes. Let's get ready to take the print of the Collagraph. So I'm using a little bit of Inky Pool and Twilight, and I'm going to cover the whole of the gel plate with that, a very thin layer. Now it looks like I've got quite a lot on the plate, but there's actually quite a big bubble in that paint. So I'm going to roll that out. And so I get a nice really thin layer. Now I'm using the 12 by 14 gel plate. So this is quite a big plate for me. I normally work on a slightly smaller plate, but I thought I'd get the big guns out today to do this one. So I'm going to roll it out nice and thin, and then I'm going to carefully take my cardboard collage and I'm going to place that onto the gel plate. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to lightly tip tap that. Because what you don't want to do is take the whole of the paint off, but you just want to lift the little areas where the texture, and leave the texture actually onto the gel plate. Okay, so here we are, the moment of truth. Is it or is it not going to work? So lifting that very gently, what that will do is take off the paint where the higher areas of the collage are. And so you should be left with the lines and definition in between where the cardboard layers are and the embossing. So here I'm going to use a little bit of heavy cream, which is a PaperArtsy colour by Seth Apter. It's one of my favourites actually. And I'm going to dab on to where the light area is using a makeup sponge. Now I particularly like a makeup sponge when you're applying paint to a gel plate because it allows it to stick quite nicely. And here, as you can see, I'm adding it on into little squares, and hopefully that gives it almost like a projected light area within the light air, the light ray of the lighthouse. I then did exactly the same thing using red for the definition of the lighthouse, and I used red lipstick for that. So I used a very thin layer of white paint to pull the print, but what I actually did is I mixed a couple of drops of drying retarder into that so that it didn't dry too quickly, being that it's on a big plate. Now I chose to use a roll-off piece of paper to pull the print because I liked the mono print that I did previously, so I was hoping to replicate something similar. What you'll notice is the black outline of the lighthouse when I pull the print. That was drawn on the back of the gel plate, so that won't be lifted off. And there you go. There's the Collagraph with the cut background. It looks to me like it's almost been snowing. So I wanted to add the words "Shine Your Light" onto the Collagraph print. And so I didn't want to have them so that they were square. So what I'm doing here is I'm starting off by printing "your", and then I'm going to add a little bit of masking tape over "shine" and "light", so that all you get is the print of "your" on the stamp into the centre of the light ray. You're going to do exactly the same thing with "shine" and "light" in order to get those individually. Now you could then use that cutout piece as a piece of art in itself, should you choose to. But let me show you one more thing that you can do with that using chalk pastels. So I'm just going to add a little bit of Pritt stick onto the back of the collage, and I'm going to stick that to another piece of cardboard. So using chalk pastels, what I'm just going to do is colour in the collage that I've made in the realistic colours of the lighthouse. Now when it came to adding in the sky background, what I had realised was the mistake that I made is the cardboard that I chose to add the collage to was shiny. And so the mistake with that is that the chalk pastels didn't really chalk up that well onto a shiny surface. So next time I do this, I'll make sure that the surface of the cardboard that I choose to stick it onto would be not shiny. So put your collage face down onto your gel plate and you're going to rub that just very gently. I didn't show the rubbing on this before, I actually just peeled it off very carefully, but you're going to just transfer the chalk onto your gel plate. And as you can see, like I mentioned before, the sky didn't transfer that well because the cardboard was shiny, so therefore the chalk didn't actually stick to the surface. But there you can see how it's just taken off a little bit, but it is left actually quite a bit onto the gel plate, and you can see the textures that were left there from the embossing. So because the sky didn't really come up that dark, what I've decided to do is add some Inky Pool blue paint from PaperArtsy onto the plate using a brayer. I then filled in the little edges using a makeup sponge so I could go right up to the lighthouse. So to pull the print, I wanted to use white, so I chose Cloud9, but I also used drying retarder within that. So I literally put 2 or 3 drops into, I probably had about 3/4 of a paint tube of the Cloud9, and I put that on there. Now the reason I used the drying retarder was because the weather here was quite warm, and also because it's a larger plate that the paint dries too quickly. So the drying retarder would actually slow the process down somewhat. Now the white layer needs to be fairly thin, so you should just about see the image of the lighthouse through that before I rub the back of it to make sure that all the paint would stick to the paper before actually pulling the print. So here we go, let's have a look and see how that came out this time. So it's quite a pale print. Some people actually prefer the pale to the hard colours on a print. But there you go, that's it up against the original collage and then against the previous prints that were done with the acrylic paint onto the gel plate as well. I hope you enjoyed it and thank you for joining me.